Hi, everybody, it's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on culture on the change grid and probably finish it up. And so, since our last discussion, I've been looking at the change grid, looking at the overlays, getting some things prepared for today's call, and something struck me. And that was that the form that these labels are in is not really something that overlays on the change grid. So I thought, I just need to change the way it's positioned. So they're talking about integration, assimilation, marginalization, separation. The change grid reveals how you perceive yourself. And I think you would probably perceive yourself in the other set of words. You perceive yourself as being integrated, assimilated, separated, marginalized. So these could be things that you're doing consciously that other might be doing to you, but it needed to be expressed in that perceptory sort of way. So that's why I've kind of changed just a little bit. I don't think it makes any grand difference, but that was bothering me. So anyway, I said that one of the things I wanted to do in today's call was to just look at some of the other layers to see what insights we might be able to gain into that. So to kind of jump into that, we have okay, here's your square. And just said, if you do the quick overlay, separated is upgrid, integrated is outgrid, assimilated, downgrid, marginalized, ingrid. Old news, very interesting, but still old news. Then if we wanted to overlay this onto the levels of tension, I think this is something Kathy brought up last time, is that the further upgrid you are, perhaps the more separated you're likely to feel. If you are very far down grid, perhaps assimilated, maybe how you feel, it may be how you perceive yourself, it may be how others do it, but assimilated is kind of like a letting go. I don't want to say so much a giving up, but it's definitely a compliance to whatever's going around there. So you've allowed yourself to, at least in part, be absorbed by what's going on. And just remember, marginalized makes great sense when we just remember that everything in grid has a full change grid available to it, but it's a smaller world. It's more of a limited range of overall experiences and the ability those experiences would have required to do them well. So
see, that marginalized is a difficult group because those are individuals also who, according to the author here, is saying they are individuals who feel disconnected in the environment. They don't feel in an association with the host group or their own group. And so they are ones who at times from an identification standpoint are struggling with how their identity connects to the environment that they exist in.
Right. And I think that we could even apply that to any sort of a subculture that exists today or that we were exposed to growing up. Like for some reason, when I graduated from high school, I graduated in 1975, the whole goth thing was just getting started. I don't remember a lot of, kids wearing dark makeup. It may very well be that the school forbade it, but nevertheless, I don't remember that whole goth kind of subculture existing when I was in high school. So are any of you young enough to kind of remember when that sort of subculture arose? Because talk about a group that's marginalized. I kind of felt that would describe that group.
Yeah, I remember seeing folks that would fit that description.
Yeah, just wander around downtown Portland. I promise you, you're going to see all kinds of very interesting people. Now, are they marginalized by society? I'm sure by certain members of society, they're very aggressively marginalized. I'm sure there's also a big chunk of society who just kind of goes, yes, this is just another day on planet Earth. But I think a lot of times people that are feeling marginalized are actually actively participating in their own marginalization. They want to be separate. They want to be distinct. They don't want to be absorbed into whatever the host culture happens to be. And, they understand that they don't really fit into any sort of established culture. I know I'm babbling, but does that resonate with you guys?
Are they trying to fit into their own established group?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's the whole thing. Every exercise in nonconformity is really just an exercise in conforming to a different set of standards.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you
And that,
know,
that deals with that perception perspective, right? So like when they don't fit in, I imagine they may try to make their own kind
right,
of way. You know, I
create
had
their
some
own path.
foster care kids that were into that, and they were what do you call it? The skaters, the
Oh,
skateboarders,
yeah,
and they definitely have their own little thing. Even the surfers have their own
absolutely.
language and all different kinds of things. And anyone outside of that, I
Mhm.
remember the kids will always call them posers. And I was like, what's a poser? It's like they're acting, they're not really part of it. So I
Right,
was like,
exactly.
oh,
They bought
okay.
the outfit, but they don't really belong.
Right, right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Cultural appropriation. Yeah, yeah, it's a big deal. But you think about that again, as we said from the very beginning, the truth is that every moment of every day, each of us are trying to exist in our own internal multicultural environment. So if I said, what culture do you belong to? How many of you could say, well, dozens of them? It really depends. So
Yeah.
I'm part of the culture who's college educated. I'm part of the culture who's retired. I'm part of the culture who is carnivores. I'm part of the culture that's into weightlifting. All these are different cultures or subcultures at the very least. And we each have our own special combination of those things. So, yeah.
I wonder
So,
if parts of the problem with culture in general is that is it's the same in terms of identity, how we tend to as humans look at I when we talk about I tends to be viewed in a static way in contrast to like this dynamic evolution where you grow, you develop. And so that change, I think it was Thomas Jefferson or one of the presidents that I read a quote that he said, every generation needs its own revolution.
hmm,
And so you see these kinds of shifts in cultural dynamics that, like the younger generation don't, in my opinion, have the same hangups that some of these older generations have. And we can
right,
see that
because
even in
they,
the workplace, with the millennials, it's
yeah,
like 35% of the workforce, they're not interested in retiring with a gold watch and pension.
no, 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 right, exactly. And so again, we're watching our culture evolve up that spiral dynamic. And we evolve when our values evolve. Remember that whole idea about spiral dynamics is that this is a study or a history of the evolution of human values.
Yeah, this looks like it blends in with spiral dynamics pretty well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it does
Hmm.
too. But we see it then as a cycle or a process that people work their way through over and over again, again, as opposed to four separate, distinct possibilities. We see shades of gray a lot better because of integrating things on the change grid. So anyway, I thought like, if you look at this makes sense. I can understand that the assimilated one way or another feeling more downgrade and the separated feel more upgrade. And the marginalized really do like to blend in with the wallpaper. They don't want to call a lot of attention to themselves. At the same time, they'd like to be left alone. And so that's fine. And then the integrated are the out here that are trying to make everybody, if you're too far off grid, conform to the will of a few, as opposed to work together in a cooperative, meaningful, productive way for everyone involved. So we have to always be aware that these danger zones change the scope
This
of the
looks
work.
like it could be a nice little cycle to go through with core values for a client as well, where
Absolutely.
people ultimately assimilate to the core values and integrate.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
A good
I think we've
idea.
all experienced it in our own work. Like, for example, when Stephen first started working with us, in fact, for the entire 10 years plus that Stephen worked for us, Stephen was 100% reliable in his unreliability when it came to showing up on time. Okay, so just soak in that for a second. 100% reliable in his unreliability about showing up on time. Now, he was never wildly late, but he would wander in at 9-ish. And so that might be 903, 904, whatever. Well, it drove Linda in particular, who's actually on the call right now, drove her insane because that's this collision of values, and the business opens at 9, we got to be here at 9, blah blah blah. Meanwhile, Stephen wouldn't hesitate to, we're supposed to be done at 5, he wouldn't hesitate to stay around till 6, 7, 8, whatever we were doing. Never hesitated. Was never never even spoken of. He would just always, he was in no hurry to leave. And so, I kind of figured out, well, it's all working out just fine. But there we have 3 different values observing the exact same situation. So Linda was, her cultural background, her work ethic, it really puts a very high premium on punctuality. I am notoriously early for everything because, being a speaker or a presenter, the one thing we don't want is for whoever hired us to be nervous about where are we. And so I always thought, like, if I'm not an hour early for a speaking engagement, I'm late. So, and then, obviously Stephen was kind of like, what is this whole punctuality thing you speak of? So different kind of things. So guys, can you all relate to, there are some
Oh, sure.
yeah, this is all going on. All right, so I can see, as David was pointing out, that if I am a business owner and I've got a new kind of generation that's starting to come into the industry, coming into the business, they may initially feel very marginalized. And they might be okay with being very marginalized. But then as they realize, no, they're going to have to work together, going to have to do something, they may start to feel separate but distinct and try to work together to find some ways to integrate. Over time, this will happen no matter how much we resist it. But we can slip backwards sometimes. We can speed things up if we want to. We can make it very simple and just go around the center, or we can make it very stressful and keep it going all around the outside, the extreme swings.
But
I think that that's what the whole onboarding industry is about.
Okay, tell us about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, there's seemingly this whole industry popping up along in the HR space called onboarding, which has been around for a long time, but now they have it down to a science. And what they're talking about is, if you want to ensure an assimilated workforce, your onboarding is key.
I think that's absolutely right. And that triggered for me something that I remembered after our last talk about marginalized. Remember, I said that pretty much everybody enters a new situation marginalized unless they happen to have one of these very outgoing personalities, in which case they may enter it separated because they want to integrate as quickly as possible. We have to keep in mind that the reason why we begin something marginalized goes back to our survival instinct. So without me saying anything more, how can you guys explain why marginalization is a survival tactic?
Because we don't know what's expected of us, and we don't know whether or not we can get it done.
Right. We don't know who's who, what's what. And so while we may not feel as though our life is in jeopardy, we're still not ready to start trusting, right? So we have to kind of arrive, scope things out a little bit, keep a little bit of distance, be more observant than we are active. And so I can kind of definitely understand how in an onboarding situation, everyone who comes into that company is going to start off feeling at least somewhat marginalized. And that marginalization is going to greatly impact their behavior, what they're going to share, when they're going to share it, how much they're going to disclose, whatever. Can you guys, going back to your example about onboarding, is that a subject that gets explored with new employees?
I would say so, T, and I'd also say that they carry their own cultural expectations with them, which is why separated is the next best step.
Yep. And by the way, I think that there's also the cultures that are legitimate, in fact, real sorts of things. But how many of you recognize that whoever was doing that interview, those interviews on the corporate side of things, presented a culture to the candidate that may or may not be an accurate representation of the culture as it is,
Mhm.
right? Because
Well,
they
that would be a real shame.
yeah, but then you got to polish up the apple. They got to make themselves as attractive as possible, assuming they find a candidate they really want to go after. And by the way, the candidate is doing the exact same thing. So the
That's true.
candidate has the culture that they are, their truth, but they also
And that they
have,
came from.
right, and they have the culture that they present to in order to be more whatever. Which, by the way, if you look at the subtitle in this video that Chris sent over, we're wired for conformity. Now, I'm just going to stop there. The moment someone says we're wired for X, they're saying this is inherent in the way humans operate. Therefore, there must be some reason why we're wired for conformity. And I've not had the opportunity to watch the entire video, but I got to believe they're going to get around to this idea that it is safer to conform than it is to stand out. And
Mhm.
so you let that apply to walking through the wilderness, and it's going to apply there. It's also going to apply on your first few days at a new job. So it's better to fit, it's easier to fit in than it is to force in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Okay. Other thoughts about that is, or shall we look at another layer real quick and see what's going on? No? All right. So anyway, energetically, I think that's right. This we already kind of agreed on, but I just wanted to show this layer to say, whenever you are describing this up-grid sort of energy, separated could be an interesting subject to bring up with your client. If they're very out-grid, then integration, feeling integrated could be an interesting subject to bring up. So if someone's saying like, yeah, right now I'm running this particular thing, our goal is to do that. We've got this plan all mapped out. We've got these metrics put in place. This is our blah, blah, blah. Obviously, I'm hearing a lot of driver energy that's out there, a lot of out-grid energy. And I would, if I were to say to them, it sounds like you very much integrated yourself into the way the company operates. I would like to think that that's going to get them to pause for a moment and say, yeah, I'm able to do this because I've been able to find, attract, respect, involve, whatever, honor, include all sorts of those amiable driver sorts of behaviors. And as a result of that, I fit in. I feel like I help others to feel like they fit in. We're working together. Can you guys feel that energy?
Yep.
Is there? So that could be an interesting thing to come up. And downgrade, I think, is the same thing, because if someone is saying to me, yeah, well, their ability to do it is really, really very great, and the challenge of what they do is low on a good day, then I can certainly say to them that they've very much assimilated themselves into whatever it is that happens, the subject that we happen to be talking about. So that whole idea about, they would go like, really, I've assimilated myself. Yeah, maybe you assimilated yourself. Maybe you were assimilated. No doubt it's a blend of those two things. But I don't really know that people realize that they have become assimilated. And once they do realize it, I don't know how happy they're going to be with that aha. So
not everybody really is wired to be compliant. I mean, if you look
I
at the
know.
disc, yeah, I mean, that's just not true. I mean, look at Evel Knievel, look at,
Right.
Melinda. I mean, yeah, there's so many, it's one way some people are wired, but it's not. Yep.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And so, and again, I think that the closer these things occur to the center of the change grid, the healthier overall the situation and outcomes likely to be. When we get to the extremes that we'll talk about in just a layer or two, that's when things get into to be real problematic. And so, yeah, everyone's bringing their personality to all this. I just wonder how many people are going to be okay with assimilation, and other people may be very fine with the fact that they've assimilated into a particular culture, wherever that may be, whether it's at home or
That's why I'm
business.
interested in seeing this video, because I think I understand what they're saying, the title in terms of conformity. We are indeed wired for status quo, because again, remember, the brain's first order of business is to preserve and conserve energy. So we're going to protect what's familiar.
Yeah.
And so that's just the norm of human behavior. So these kinds of outliers, they really have to have this, I call it internal integrity. That has to be in place, because without it,
Mhm.
I always
Right.
say this internal integrity leads to external integration. So if they're not internally complete, which is what integrity means, it's going to be hard to have a sense of confidence to stand out when you're an outlier, right?
Right.
You'll fall apart. That's what
Right.
we see this with the whistleblowers, right?
Yeah,
They're
you'll become a
supposed to
target
protect
one way or
them.
another. Right. Yep. Yep.
Exactly.
And then you have to be ready to face those consequences. And that's a very different
Exactly.
thing. And that's why, depending on what situation you're in, the truth is that sometimes it's easier to just be assimilated. It's not worth it to be putting forth the fight, or whatever the case may be. So, for example, I'll give you this thing. Our family knows in no uncertain terms that Thanksgiving belongs to us. So we are the ones, we put on Thanksgiving. We've been doing it for 30 years. And so, that's our thing. That's our thing. Well, before I came along, I'm sure they had other ways of doing things, but guess what they decided to do? They decided to just assimilate into whatever we wanted. I like to think it's because the food's good, but that to me is like when you just kind of go like, yeah, I'll comply with that. I'll conform to all that, because I don't really feel powerfully enough to fight against it. I don't have another case I'm trying to build. So fine, I'll get assimilated into that being the annual routine.
I think the company would be attractive as well, T, besides the food being good.
Oh, you think? Well, I suppose. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true.
But I think conformity as a value would be that of the host culture.
Oh,
Mhm.
tell us about that. Because I was thinking conformity is just a tool we have available to us. But go ahead, tell us about.
Well, because the whole idea is to get you to conform to their value system, because for whatever reason, they believe in their value system, right?
Sure.
And so if you think about it, when folks come into an organization, and if they do not conform to that value system, then they are identified as someone who is bucking the system, if you will, or someone who doesn't fit the culture of that organization. And what may wind up happening for that individual, short or long term, is that they get exercised out of that organization because they are coming against whatever that value system is, and they are, as a result, not conforming to that. And so if they say, well, I don't believe in this, or I see this differently, or my identification is X,
Right.
then the light gets shined on them. And that can either be, because in the DE&I space, one of the things we have migrated to talk a lot about in organizations is trying to create a sense of belonging for your workforce. And that can be very, very challenging at times. And so if it's interpreted as this person is not conforming, if I can use that word, and that becomes a conflict.
Absolutely. And I think that we see lots of examples of that in perhaps, well, certain religions for sure, that if you don't comply, you get shunned. I think that when it comes to the way families operate with one another, someone just talked about having the black sheep in the family. And so, you're just, are we not doing the same thing, shunning them or whatever? So I think that's really it. So to a certain degree, I think that having the ability to do a controlled conform, if that could be allowed to exist, could be a very solid strategy and a very useful tool.
Yeah.
You know?
My client in New York has check-in. They have check-ins for all of their teams and departments. and they follow a particular pattern. The first element is good news. Who has good news to share? It can be personal or business. The second one is who has an example of core values.
Mhm.
And tell me the core value in the example. So it just gets reinforced. So I agree with what Tim is saying.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. And that's it. They're just trying to find more participants like themselves to be able to hold on and hopefully to grow. And so that's what it's all about. When someone comes along and they've got the opposite message, they're feeling see the opposite vision or whatever, they represent a great danger. So they're shunned because they're dangerous. And they represent a way through which the culture might lose control over whatever it holds near and dear.
Right.
So
In
get
fact,
rid of
I've seen
them.
a definition of innovation from the CEO of Netflix when someone asked him, what's the difference between creativity and efficiency?
Mm,
So conformity forms efficiency, right? So he said the way to think about it is innovation requires variation. And manufacturing, he said, where you have like the Six Sigma, that kind of stuff, you're trying to reduce variation. So
mhm.
fundamentally, the paradigm is to reduce variation, and fundamentally for creativity or for to be creative, innovation paradigm is to increase it. And I think that's what
Sure.
the
And
difference
so
is.
you just said
Conformity.
that conformity leads to efficiency. What if I
Yeah,
said
within the organization, think about it, because they don't want too many rogue people within the organization, because then you're challenging the system. The system,
exactly, but
drives behavior.
right, but where could that level of conformity lead them? Think Kmart.
Yeah, and that's what happens with the organization. That's why I call
Right,
them sustainable mediocrity, because
right.
people
And
aren't thinking about driving the up.
sooner or later, they're going to fall apart. And so I think that it's important, if we're going to think about conformity leads to efficiency, that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're conforming to is the most efficient way you could be doing so.
Right.
Well,
Don't we
may
hear
be
that in
efficient.
organization when they say this is the way we've always done it, and
Exactly right.
change and everything
Exactly
changed?
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
They may be efficient, but they might not be effective.
Exactly
exactly.
right. Remember, we talked about the 3 E's. So effective, efficient, and elegant.
Mm,
So if you really want to make the greatest amount of profit, you're really looking for elegance. So efficiency is great. I mean, because I can measure it and I know I can improve upon it. But ultimately, am I not trying to create the most efficient way possible to do something? In all likelihood, that would end up being a rather simple sort of a system. And that's where the whole concept of elegance comes into play. So how can I get to the outcome with the fewest moving parts?
yeah.
And, yeah.
But T, there are cultures that the culture is to not conform, to be innovative and support constant creativity.
Sure.
And so to say that it's always about complying. So some of it is the cultural norm is non-compliance. That does happen. I can't think of
But then Edie, what you're really doing then is you are conforming to a non-conforming culture.
right.
You're joining in, because I'll give you an example. I did some work with 3M, and 3M has everything they do, it's because of innovation. I don't know how many patents come out of that place, but you got to believe it's more than you can hold in your hands. So I think, though, they're saying, like, we really, really, really want people to be creative, think outside the box, do that. Well, let's say that they have a new engineer join their team, and this engineer is always by the book, follow the rules. If that hasn't worked before, we're going blah, blah, blah. They could very well be lacking in the level of innovation, expressiveness, et cetera, that they're looking for, in which case they would be the nonconformist in a non-conforming environment. Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
So I learned this in Philosophy 101 when I was at Hope. So D. Ivan Dijkstra wrote a book, and the subtitle of the book was Understanding What We Mean by What We Say When We Talk About What We Do. And he would say
Wow.
to you that all non-compliance is an illusion. that non-compliance, your act of being non-compliant automatically makes you resonate with another group who holds those same non-compliant beliefs.
Mm,
So,
mm.
and generally those outside organizations have even higher levels of expectation of compliance than the original situation did.
Mhm.
You know,
Okay.
so for example, if I was raised as a God-fearing, Bible-thumping, perfect boy, mama's boy or whatever, and I decide to join a motorcycle gang, I think I'm being non-compliant. But how many of you realize that motorcycle gangs have a whole set of rules? You dare not violate, and so you're just conforming to a different set of standards.
Right.
Makes you wonder if anyone actually is a true rebel, someone
Yeah.
who follows no one else's model. Yeah.
Hey T, I don't want to give it away, but in the video it talks about collective illusions, and one of the parts of the video, it's where conformity was detrimental to survival, to where people had to in small pockets not conform in order to survive.
So
So
shall we
it's
go ahead and take 5 minutes and watch this video? Let's see if I can show it to everybody
Yeah.
all at once.
I
I'm
got
screen
popcorn.
sharing. I think I got to stop screen sharing. New share. I want to share the video and I want to share the sound. Share this. Let's go full size. And let's go back to the beginning. Now you guys should be able to hear this video.
I believe our society has gotten
Yes.
to the point where
Okay, so you guys are hearing it like you were watching it yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
you can't question, you can't provoke, you just have to adhere to consensus. For whatever value we think we're creating, I can guarantee you the end result is the establishment and maintenance of norms that do not reflect public consensus. You need to be aware of the forces that influence your behavior, and cultural norms are a massive influence that we're often unaware of. Cultural norms are essentially group consensus at scale. Norms lurk in the background. We rarely think about them, and unless we are actively challenging them and making sure they are valuable, they will eventually become collective illusions. Simply put, collective illusions are situations where most people in a group go along with a view they don't agree with because they incorrectly believe that most people agree with it. And because the people themselves are upholding the illusion, only the people themselves can dismantle it. As human beings, our brains are absolute energy hogs. Your brain's always looking for ways to reduce energy expenditure. Well, one of the best ways to do that is through the use of cultural norms. There are things we agree to as a society that help us grease the wheels of social interaction, and they make life predictable for us. Cultural norms usually reflect the prior generation's group consensus, not our own. Because we're born into them by and large, we just assume that this group consensus reflects something that is true and good, that people really want. But it's not correct. A lot of norms are just entirely arbitrary, and we need to be skeptical about norms because norms can exist for a very long time, not because they were ever true, but just because people don't question them. The areas of the brain that track cultural norms are the same areas of the brain that process social information in general. And a violation of a cultural norm will trigger the exact same error signal that your brain triggers when it is perceived that you are going against your group. Artists throughout history have played a role in purposely challenging norms. We see them as a little weird and a little disconnected from society because they're supposed to be. And that creates a permission structure that allows them to hold a mirror up to us and say, is this really you? Is this what you believe? Sometimes you come back and say, absolutely it is. And you're offended that they even asked. But a lot of times it's the first crack in the norm that eventually breaks. And as people start to talk about the artist and about the art, Rather than the norm itself, it reveals the opportunity for people to reveal to each other what they actually value. And the norm can disintegrate and a new norm can emerge. Vietnam faced an incredible challenge with child malnutrition that had basically been impossible to solve through traditional top-down means. They finally addressed the problem and solved it through a completely different approach called positive deviance. Start by actually going into communities and saying, let's find the examples of people in these communities that are positive deviants, meaning whatever problem you're facing, like malnutrition, there's some family whose kids are not malnourished, even though they're under the same constraints as everybody else. They discovered that these mothers were supplementing the meager amounts of food the kids had with shrimp. Well, those were freely available and widely available sources of nutrition. But what they found out was at some point, a norm had emerged in that community that said shrimp were harmful to kids. The mothers that were doing that were doing it in private. They didn't want anybody else to know they were because they knew they were violating a cultural norm. It wasn't enough to tell people to feed their kids shrimp. They had to find these mothers and elevate their voices and allow them to communicate to other parents and break that cultural norm. But once they did, they made dramatic gains in child nutrition for decades. The fact that we're so hung up on top-down, expert-driven solution to everything is the only reason why positive deviance seems strange to us. But in reality, it's the only way you can ever drive social change under collective illusions that are rooted in cultural norms. If you understand that fact, and you create the enabling conditions that allow everyday people to reveal who they really are to each other, these illusions can crumble in a hurry, and social change can happen at a scale and pace that would otherwise seem unimaginable.
This series is brought to you by Stand Together, a community of changemakers tackling our biggest challenges. And to learn more.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, I think that's what we need to do with fentanyl.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it is a scourge. It is the -- cause of death for adults between the
About how
ages
you can
of
partner with
18
Stan.
and 45.
Really?
Yep, it is the #1 cause of death for adults between the ages of 18 and 45.
And this is, I know that there's also a lot of accidental deaths associated with fentanyl because it's toxic in so many different ways and tiny amounts can do you in. So are a lot of these like actual overdoses as opposed to accidental exposures? Did they give you any breakdown around that?
They're overdoses. There are, I forget, the numbers are staggering, but there's something like hundreds a day.
Oh my God.
And now they're importing, you know, the cartels in Mexico import the base chemicals from China and then make them into pills and other forms of illicit drugs. And now they're starting to color them like Skittles and promote them to kids.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. I know that just touching one could be deadly for a first responder or anyone. Yeah.
I'm just thrilled to death. All my kids are old enough to know better.
Yeah, good. Excellent.
I hope.
Right. Well,
well, hope, because I was just at a speaker's retreat and one of the speakers couldn't show up because her son, it was laced. He was playing with heroin or cocaine, but it was laced. That wouldn't have killed him. But he was in his 30s, so it's not just kids.
Oh, wow.
But
yeah. Right.
Wow.
I know so many I don't know why, but my speaker friends, many of them have lost their kids. But you're right, they're doing the rainbow candy thing now to bring in toddlers and young children. It's incredible.
like sidewalk chalk.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right. Exactly right. Okay, so that an excellent little video. I would like to do a deeper dive into this this whole concept of collective. What was the word?
Illusion.
Collective illusion. Because to me, I'd like to know, where does collective illusion live on the change grid? I know where illusion lives. Okay, that's something we could definitely do a nice deep dive into to figure out. Does illusion exist in multiple places?
I think it does, but I think it's only at the danger zones.
Well, I know that one of the words, in fact, the only word that appears more than once on the adjective map is delusional. And it appears at all four of these powerless points, because we all know they're all the exact same point. So in the middle of it is delusional, and the PowerPoint would be whatever the opposite of delusional is that having high clarity, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think
So,
David's right. It probably is all four quadrants. The thing what I got away from the video as I was taking notes was this idea of perception plays a key role in that, right? So when he's talking about the efficiency of the brain and how it likes to preserve the energy that we just talked about, and those faculties like the anterior cingulate cortex is what allows us to toggle between right brain activity, in other words, the image, the vision, the grand vision, and the cognitive faculties of the left brain. And it helps us to kind of simulate what will be the consequences. And if that's like normalized, then you're just going to go for the conformity, and that's easy for the brain to do, to preserve energy.
And it's the easiest way to take the attention away from yourself.
Exactly. So you don't have to put forth any effort in there, because the same thing with like when we set a goal for ourselves, right? We're almost automatically going to have some anxiety, some, worry, doubt, fear, because again, you have a familiar conditioning that's always going to win. That is the set point. Those are part of what's called the default mode network. And so you're going to result back to that default mode before you actually get into the positive deviance of actual,
Right.
creating
And
and
the question
scaffolding new
becomes,
behaviors.
why do humans do that? And I get
Yeah,
back to my thought that this is all about survival instincts playing out.
exactly. Yeah, it always
So
wins. It
until
always
I'm sure
wins.
I'm safe, I have to assume that I'm not.
Yeah.
And so I need to, marginalization is a really good thing. But so we only have a few minutes left. So I guess we will be talking a bit more about this just to finish this next time around. So let me give this to you as a little bit of homework. So how could feeling integrated end up moving you into the danger zone, or separated, put you upgrid, or marginalized, in-grid, assimilated, downgrid? How does that become assimilated? So why is it actually good to not be 100% integrated? Why is it dangerous to be 100% assimilated? What happens if you allow yourself to be 100% marginalized or 100% separated? How do those dangers express themselves in ways that are distinct and different from one another?
Turnover.
Yeah, where would turnover be, or go like, what causes turnover in an organization? Is it the people that feel overly integrated? Are they leaving? Is it the overly assimilated, the overly marginalized, the overly separated? Who's going to leave? I would think.
So the overly marginalized and the overly separated are definitely on the outs, it would seem. I don't know, but there does seem to be danger in being too integrated and not aware.
Right. Well,
Or too assimilated and not aware.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, well, I don't want to give away what it is, but I think this represents we outgrid danger zone integration can result in the creation of a culture that can be characterized by some pretty ugly things. Yeah. Similarly, if you've been fully assimilated down here, then you are now part of a new culture that could be very problematic.
Right, the Borg.
Well, this is the Borg. This is also any cult. This is where cults get their people from. Up here, this is where we get combatants to join us on whatever our quest may be. You're so pulled into this outgrid energy that there's no longer a separation between you and the entity that you're out there fighting for, or, whatever it happens to be. I do believe the person who's in the upgrid danger zone exits as quickly as possible. So this is flee. Remember in our whole survival skills, people up here are going to run, they're going to flee. These people are going to fight. These people are going to fight. These people are going to freeze, and these people are going to fade, disappear into the background. And by the way, I think marginalized people are more likely to stick around in an unhealthy environment than the separated are. Mostly because they're not calling any attention to themselves. They've figured out a way to exist without getting noticed about that, where the separated are feeling like, I'm done here. It's like, I've got nothing to bring that they want, and they've got nothing to give me that I need. And so we need to move on. This person doesn't have the level of confidence or the level of productive tension.
Yeah, I would give you one example. I had a manager in New York who was so upgrid on her change grid. Everything was in the upgrid, most things were in the upgrid danger zone. And I tried to lower her tension and give her some skill development and bring her tension down. And she was a member of Team 1, the senior leadership team, but she was also a leader of Team 2. And she could never bring herself to be of support of Team 1. And that was very upgrade to her, and she ended up leaving.
Yep. Yep. You need a do-over. If you feel threatened, you've got to get out of the threatening environment. But sometimes you just feel like I've kind of damaged myself, or staying here is going to ultimately damage myself. Then I need to go. I got to get out of here. Yeah. And by the way, they may have gone through several stages of progressive separation, or dealing with like first they felt separated and wanted to do something to get integrated. And then they realized, no, that's not going to be fulfilled. So it is interesting to talk about what happens in between these things as we migrate from one to another, and what might pull us forwards or backwards. Who knew that this was going to give rise to 3 or 4 hours worth of discussion that at least 9 of you find rather interesting. So that's always good. That's always good.
Well, T, I think it speaks to the skill of interpersonal skills, the ability to, I'm sitting here laughing because I'm thinking of first grade when the reports used to come home indicating how well as a child you played with the other kids, how well, and that really has stayed with us through adulthood. I mean, when you look at job descriptions, it's one of the competencies that's in there about one's ability to work, and how well are your interpersonal skills.
Yeah. Imagine how tough that was for me as an introvert. Why am I in this culture? How come I can't have a culture of introverts? Wouldn't that be okay? We're all right. We're happy to get
try to run an engineering company.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like there are a lot of people out there who are perfectly content and perhaps maximally supportive if you don't force them to socialize.
Yeah. I'm in that club, so don't
worry. Exactly.
And I can tell you about me. I slapped the hell out of a kid like the equivalent of first grade for throwing sand. Now we're playing in the sandbox, but he didn't have my permission to throw sand on me, and so I got in a heap of trouble because I slapped him so hard.
See, but that's your culture coming through. So how we end up disciplining someone else, how we end up correcting them, very strong cultural distinctions about what's okay. It's not okay.
That was not a good day for me. I can remember that, and that was first grade.
Well, I remember when my godchildren are half Jamaican, and now they're adults, but nevertheless, they were half Jamaican. And when they would go to Jamaica to see their grandparents, they learned some things. And one of them was that the worst thing the grandma or grandpa would ever say to you is, walk with me.
Yes. You're going to get to lecture. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, walk with me. No, can't you just hit me like an American family? Why do I have to be tortured with logic? I don't get it. Just hit me already. Okay, anyway, there you go. All right, time's up for now. So we'll pick up where we left off. Do give some thought, though, to these danger zones. I can only hope that in the work that we do, we don't encounter people that are feeling these 4 states to that level of extreme. But keep in mind, everything we know about these areas from other layers is still going to hold true. So this is the whole point of the merging of brilliance. That this model was separate, marginalized, etc. That makes sense. If it makes sense standing by itself, it should make even more sense when you combine it with other things that make sense standing all by themselves. So that's what we're doing. That's this whole merging of brilliance exercise. So,
Excellent.
all right. Was that, you guys have a wonderful weekend? Oh, it's Labor Day weekend, isn't it? At least in the US.
Yeah, I'll be one
Yeah,
year
have a great
older.
weekend, everybody.
Yeah, have a
Birthday's
great
Monday,
weekend.
so I'll be 1 year
Yep.
older, 53.
Oh,
When's your
Happy
birthday?
Wow.
It's on Monday, September 5th.
Really?
Happy birthday.
Happy
Yeah.
birthday.
Happy
to you.
birthday.
well,
Yes.
yes.
In fact, I will sing for you now. I sang in a professional choir, and this is how we sang happy birthday to one another. Happy birthday, happy birthday. People dying everywhere, pain and sorrow fill the air. Happy birthday. Pray for the dead, and the dead will pray for you. Happy birthday. But
See, I'm
That's
depressed
recorded for
now.
posterity.
because we were part of a choir, though, it was all very dramatic, and the coloratures would come in, and so it was truly
funny.
a song to behold. But that was the song. Yeah,
And now it's recorded for posterity.
I'm so glad. Maybe I'll
Exactly.
leave it in the recording. Okay, everybody, take care. Bye for now.
All righty.
Bye.
Have a good one,
Guys.
everybody. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Brian.
Thank you.